My life had always been like this. My father spent his days and nights plowing the fields. My mother's hands always carried the scent of flour and mud. Since childhood, I was more attached to books and pen. I could never bear the burning heat of the fields at noon. That is why, after finishing school and I learned a little accounting, fate brought me to the Dara. And from then on, I stayed there as a clerk. The Dara was like a different world in our village. From outside, it looked like tall walls and a heavy gate. But once you stepped inside, it felt like a small village of its own. On one side, 2 tractors stood parked, with plows, rotavators, and old tools beside them. On the other side, buffaloes and cows were tied, their bells constantly ringing. With these animals was Kasim Bai, who looked after them day and night. My room was in one corner of the courtyard. The door was made of thick wood, and above it was a small ventilator through which sunlight entered during the day. Right next to the room was a small washroom. Its walls were damp with old stains of moisture, and inside hung a tiny mirror, so foggy that when you looked into it, your own face appeared like a stranger's. The atmosphere of the Dara completely changed between day and night. During the day, it was full of people. Farmers kept coming. Someone asked for fertilizer, someone for medicine, and someone for money. The tractors roared to life, spreading smoke and noise all around. The buffaloes pulled at their ropes, trying to break free, and Kasim Bai shouted at them constantly. I sat in the office room, bent over the register, surrounded by the smell of ink and the scratching of paper. In the evening, Chaudhry Salim brought out his chair and sat down, while people came one by one with their problems. I listened, I wrote, and I kept the accounts clear. Often he would say, Nasir, remind me tomorrow about this matter. The fertilizer payment is still pending. And I would nod my head. It was because of their trust that my words carried weight in front of everyone. But all this was the routine of the day. The moment the sun went down, the farmers returned to their homes, and the entire Dara sank into silence. Darkness fell like someone had stretched a black sheet across the sky. At that time, only the 2 of us remained, me and Kasim Bai. A single room, a lantern, and silence spread everywhere. That was the time when the quietness of the Dara always felt strange to me. Sometimes the roof would creak. Sometimes the shutters of the window rattled slightly. And sometimes it felt as if someone was walking slowly in the courtyard. I would laugh it off, thinking it was just my imagination. But Kasim Bai often sensed something. One night, he even said that he had seen. Kasim Bai once said that he had seen a woman in the Dara. I laughed it off as a joke. I told him it was just darkness, the mind playing tricks. But somewhere deep inside, that thought stayed with me. Because the Dara, which felt so full of life during the day, always turned into something strange and unfamiliar at night. As if this land belonged to us in the daytime, but at night it slipped into the possession of someone else. That day had begun like any ordinary day. When I opened my eyes in the morning, a soft ray of sunlight was entering through the small ventilator in the ceiling of my room. Outside, I could hear the bells of the buffaloes ringing and the voice of Kasim Bai, who always called each animal by its name while milking them. I got up from the charpoy and poured water from the old metal pot onto my face. That water was always cool, no matter how hot the weather became. The chill spread through my whole body. After that, I picked up my register and started reviewing the accounts I had written the previous day. A little while later, Kasim Bai brought in a brass container filled with milk and placed it inside, along with a small copper cup. I drank 1 cup of milk without sugar, because sugar was always in short supply at the Dara. Then I soaked the stale bread from the night before into the milk and ate it. Around 9 o'clock, the farmers began arriving at the Dara. The first one was Amanat. He always came first because his land was near the canal, and his turn for water came early in the morning. He walked straight into the office and said, Nasir Mayan, that seed supplier came yesterday. I opened the register and said, yes, he came. For your field, 2 sacks of wheat seed were recorded last week. 1 sack is still pending. He nodded, satisfied, and left. After that, people kept coming one by one. Some came to get fertilizer. some to ask for medicine. By midday, my desk was buried under a pile of registers and papers. Sometimes a farmer would walk in wiping sweat from his forehead, telling me his troubles. Sometimes another would fold his hands and say, "Please tell Chaudhry Sahib that I'll pay the money next week." By noon, the dera was filled with noise. The buffaloes were being fed. Qasim Bai's shirt was soaked in sweat. I called out to him, "Qasim, come here. I need to write down the names of the new laborers." He washed his mud-stained hands and came to stand beside me, dictating names one by one. Just then, Chaudhry Salim also arrived. 2 men were with him. As always, he wore a white salwar kameez and carried a heavy wooden staff in his hand. Sitting down, he said, "Nasir, bring me the fertilizer accounts. Let me see who still owes how much." I pushed the register toward him and began reading out the names one by one. He listened seriously, sometimes getting angry, sometimes laughing loudly. As evening approached, the farmers started leaving one by one. The noise of the dera slowly began to fade. The red glow of the setting sun spread across the walls. The buffaloes slowly settled down. That night, Qasim Bai and I ate dinner together. Simple food, lentils and bread.
We ate our bread and lentils. Outside in the courtyard, a light cool breeze was blowing. I lay down on the charpoy and looked up at the sky. One by one, the stars began to appear. With the breeze, I could sometimes hear dogs barking in the distance. Everything seemed perfectly normal, just like every other night. Later, we both went into the room to sleep. It must have been around 12 or 12:30 at night. The courtyard was silent. I was deep in sleep when suddenly I woke up. My body felt heavy, but the urge to relieve myself overpowered my sleep. I badly needed to urinate. Slowly, I turned on my side and sat up. The room was pitch dark. Only a faint moonlight entered through the window. Qasim Bai was breathing heavily, lost in deep sleep. I felt around for my slippers beside the charpoy, slipped them on, and quietly unlatched the door. I stepped outside into the courtyard. The breeze was gently cool, carrying along a few dry leaves that rustled as they moved. The washroom was in one corner of the courtyard, against the mud wall. I went there, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The air inside was damp and stale. When I came back out of the washroom, I suddenly froze. The courtyard had fallen into an unusual silence, as if everything had stopped all at once. The only sound was the faint croaking of frogs coming from the fields far away. I took 2 steps forward when suddenly I heard the sound of a child crying. It was a soft cry, like a child weeping somewhere in the darkness. My steps stopped right there. My heart began to pound. At that hour of the night, the sound of a child crying was impossible. There were no children at the dera. I tried convincing myself that maybe the sound was coming from some house in the village. But in the very next moment, the crying grew closer, as if a child was sitting by the trees just outside the courtyard, weeping. I tried to peer over the wall, straining my eyes into the darkness. But it was too dark to see anything. I was still wondering when suddenly the crying stopped. For 2 seconds, there was silence. Then, out of nowhere, the same sound turned into laughter. It was the laughter of a small child, like he had been playing and suddenly burst into giggles. But there was something strange in that laughter. A metallic ring, faint but very deep. A cold wave ran through my entire body. I quickly darted my eyes around. The courtyard was empty. The branches of the trees swayed with the breeze. Even the birds were silent. I stepped back. My heart screamed for me to run back into the room. But my ears refused to obey. They were being pulled toward that sound. Then, all at once, the laughter stopped. And as soon as it stopped, I heard a faint rustling sound from one corner of the courtyard, as if someone had stepped on dry. It sounded as if bare feet had stepped on dry leaves. I held my breath and stood still, even slowing my breathing so I could hear more clearly. The rustling came from the corner of the courtyard, like someone was walking barefoot over fallen leaves. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I gathered some courage and slowly began to move forward. The moonlight was faint, but just enough to make out the shadows of things. When I reached the corner of the courtyard, my steps suddenly froze. There stood a child, about 4 years old, barefoot, wearing a dirty vest smeared with mud. His hair was tangled and messy. He was standing by the wall, staring at me. For a few moments, I could only stare back. My body stiffened. My mind went numb. On that lonely night, in this deserted dara, where had this child come from? There was a strange gleam in his eyes, traces of tears on his face. Yet, on his lips, a faint smile, as if he had been crying earlier but was now trying to smile upon seeing me. "Son." The word slipped out of my mouth involuntarily. My voice was so low, it sounded as though even I didn't believe what I was saying. The child said nothing. He only lowered his head and breathed softly. Then, suddenly, he let out a faint laugh. That same innocent, yet strangely unnatural laugh. A chill shot through my spine. I took a step back. My heart urged me to run back into the room, but my mind was trapped in confusion. Who was this child? Where had he come from? What was he doing here at this hour? I tried to look away, but my eyes seemed trapped. Then, slowly, the child turned toward the wall and began moving toward the courtyard's edge. The way he walked was strange, as if someone older was forcing him forward. I stood there like stone. The child was right before me, by the wall, while his laughter still echoed in my ears. I took a deep breath and forced myself to speak. "Hey, who are you?" My voice sounded unusually loud in the silence of the night, but the child did not respond. He simply leaned against the wall and stood there, lowering his head. I stepped forward. My heart raced, but curiosity drove me closer. As soon as I took another step, I suddenly felt a faint cool breeze pass through the courtyard. The whole night had been suffocating, but now, all at once, the air turned cold. I froze. The child was still standing silently. "Son, where is your home?" I whispered again. This time, he slowly lifted his face. And what I saw was not a human face at all. A form so unnatural, I cannot even describe it. My legs trembled violently. I stepped back. My heart screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. And then, the latch of the room's door suddenly creaked. The sound echoed in the silence, as if someone had pushed it from inside. I spun around in shock. The door was closed.
But a faint movement was still there. I nervously looked again at the child, but he was no longer there. Near the wall was only an empty space, and on the soil, small wet footprints, as if someone had just stepped away. At that moment, my heart sank. I realized this was no ordinary child. Something else had appeared before my eyes. Breathing heavily, I rushed back into the room. My heartbeat was still out of control. With a trembling voice, I called out, "Qasim, Qasim, wake up, come outside." There was a child outside. Qasim was in a deep sleep. At first, he could not understand anything. But when he saw my condition, he quickly sat up. "What are you saying? At this hour of night, what child could it be?" "I saw him with my own eyes," I insisted. "First, I heard crying, then laughter, and he was standing right there by the wall. I even spoke to him. Qasim, he was right there." Qasim looked at me with disbelief, then took a deep breath and said, "Come on, let's see." We both opened the room's door and stepped into the courtyard. My eyes immediately went to that corner of the wall where the child had stood. But there was nothing. Qasim walked forward. "Where? Show me." Panicked, I pointed to the ground. Here, there were wet footprints in the soil. Just now. But now, the ground was completely dry, as though the wind had swept everything away. No marks, no shadow, nothing remained. Qasim looked at me and smiled. But within that smile, there was seriousness too. "Seems you saw a dream in your sleep. There is nothing here." I stood there silently. Inside me, a nameless fear had taken root. I knew it was no dream. I had seen that child with my own eyes. I had heard his laughter. I had heard his words. But now, everything had disappeared as if it had never existed. For many days after that night, I tried to convince myself it was only imagination. But deep in my heart, even today, I believe that moment was real. Something did appear before us, and then suddenly vanished. This was another true story. What do you think? Who was that child? Was it really something else, or just an illusion? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. If you like the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and like and share the video.